Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to New York State Homes and Community Renewal's Unified Funding 2018 application webinar. My name is Sean Fitzgerald. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Multifamily Programs here at HCR. I'm joined today by several senior HCR staff who will be presenting over the course of the webinar, including Lenny Skrill, our Upstate West Development Director, Arnie Adler, HCR's longtime Tax Credit Programs Director, Mike DeBonis, Assistant Director of HCR's Architecture and Engineering Bureau, and Kristen Slayman, the Unified Funding Round Manager. Today, we'll be presenting information that will be essential to prospective applicants seeking 9% tax credits, as well as a host of other low-cost financing options. This presentation is not meant to provide all the information you'll need to submit a successful application, nor is it a presentation on the fundamentals of affordable housing development. Instead, the webinar will provide a general overview of the application process with an emphasis on what's new compared to last year. For more comprehensive information, applicants must visit HCR's Unified Funding website, which consolidates all the documents and policy guidance you'll need in one spot. The link to the web page is included in today's presentation and in the RFP as well. So please add it to your favorites, as you will need to visit this many times in the coming weeks. Also, this presentation will not cover the application requirements for accessing HCR's 4% tax credits and tax-exempt bond financing. If you're interested in exploring those funding options, I encourage you to visit HCR's webpage and review the New York State Housing Finance Agency's Affordable Rental Housing Term Sheet and Financing Guide. So we expect today's presentation to last approximately an hour and a half, and keep in mind that the presentation in its entirety will be posted to the Unified Funding webpage. So don't go crazy taking notes. You'll be able to review this at your convenience. So with that, let's turn quickly to the agenda for the webinar. Or maybe we'll take it a little more slowly to the agenda. All right. So we'll start with a summary of the significant policy changes in this year's request for proposals. This is usually the highlight of the workshops that we have, and it'll certainly continue to be a big focus of the webinar. Then we'll go into the overview of the unified funding process, highlighting funds available, the funding round schedule, application materials, design guidance, and so on. And we'll conclude the presentation with instructions on how to request technical assistance from HCR staff so that we can efficiently provide you with guidance on any specific challenges presented by your project. This is a service that the agency has offered every year, and we find that it's very helpful for folks. So please take a look at the RFP for the guidance on how to request technical assistance so that you'll be able to access it. So what's new? Start off with increased funding caps for New York City projects. In response to the seemingly ever-escalating cost of developing housing in the City of New York, the 9% LIC per unit cap has been increased by over 20% this round, from $22,000 per unit to $27,000 per unit. Also, in an effort to reach larger projects and hopefully achieve cost savings through economies of scale, we've increased the 9% per project cap by 40%, from $1.43 million to $2 million per project. We hope these changes will provide greater incentive to developers working in New York City to access our funds and provide us a much deeper pool of competitive applications for us to consider. Next new item is income averaging. As most of you probably know, the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act 2018 created a new LIC minimum set-aside providing for income averaging. This long sought-after change in the program is geared toward promoting greater income diversity in tax credit projects by allowing higher income units to subsidize deeper affordability for lower income households. While the Department of Treasury and most states have not yet provided guidance on income averaging, HCR expects to provide some additional guidance in the near future. Next item, SLIC bifurcation and transferability, also known as certification. The state's enacted fiscal year 18-9 budget authorized for the first time bifurcation and transfer of the state low-income housing credit. These changes to the SLIC statute seek to broaden the investor pool for the state credit and thereby increase the value of SLIC for our projects. Since there's still a lot of questions about precisely how certification transferability will work, applicants and investors who are thinking about using this new authority should schedule a TA session with HCR. This is an exciting opportunity for the agency to really get more value from this resource. So we look forward to working with you to put it into effect. Tax credit pricing. For projects that rely on multiple sources of tax credit financing, for example, brownfield, historic, SLIC, LIC, HCR now requires investors and syndicators to assign an independent value to each type of credit financing, reflecting the actual market value of the resource being proposed for purchase. While we completely understand that investors look at the blended yield of all these investments, for both policy and programmatic reasons, including the need to highlight the value of these resources for taxpayers and policymakers, we will need to see the real relative values of these resources. For example, this change, this really is going to be providing some transparency. It'll be critical to showing what impact, if any, bifurcation certification has on SLIC pricing. This authority that we got this year in the enacted budget is something that's been advocated for a long time. By having this transparent pricing for tax credit resources, we'll be able to show policymakers the impact of their authorization. So very significant change. Seeker. Revisions to the State Environmental Quality Review Act regs go into effect on January 1st, 2019. Among other changes, there are amendments to the Type 1 and Type 2 lists of actions that may increase or decrease the level of seeker review that was required in the past. Please keep these in mind. They can have a significant impact on your development. Mike DeBonis will cover this in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. Green building points for smoke-free housing. As part of the state's continuing efforts to protect all New Yorkers from the harmful effects of secondhand smoke, applicants must now commit at the time of application to smoke-free housing in order to qualify for green building competitive points. At the time of application, you are just committing to a smoke-free housing environment. An actual plan will be required, acceptable to the agency prior to going to a construction closing. Maximum points for family projects in HOP and revitalization plan areas. While HCR has long offered competitive points for projects that serve large families, this year, as part of HCR's ongoing commitment to providing greater opportunity for low-income families, HCR will now offer maximum competitive points only to family projects that are located in housing opportunity census tracts or that are part of comprehensive neighborhood-specific revitalization efforts. The list of housing opportunity census tracts will be on our webpage, and a description of what will be needed for neighborhood-specific revitalization plan is contained in the RFP. Clarification of HCR's builder fee policy. In order to better align with industry practices, the Unified Funding Development Budget, Application Exhibit 3, and Construction Cost Estimate Application Attachment B2 will now separate builder's fees into builder's overhead, general conditions, and builder's profit. General requirements will no longer be included as part of builder's fees and will no longer be included under the 14% limit on builder's fees. Mike DeBonis will talk more about this change later in the presentation. New underwriting conventions. There are a few notable changes that I'd like to mention for this year. The first relates to developer fee on multi-phase projects. The RFP states that HCR may limit fee on subsequent phases of multi-phase projects if those projects were previously awarded tax credit financing. HCR will look at project specifics in considering the percentage of fee that will be recognized. In some cases, a higher fee might be warranted. In other cases, a lower fee might be appropriate. HCR is available to discuss this deal term with developers prior to application. Look forward to some spirited conversations on this one. Also, the RFP provides a new graduated developer fee structure for high-cost projects based on how far above the regional cost median a project is. Under the new structure, the basic premise is that the higher a project is above the median costs of the region, the lower the developer fee limit as a percentage of eligible costs. So this doesn't necessarily mean a lower developer fee for high-cost projects compared to low-cost projects, but rather a lower percentage fee on eligible costs. We really are seeking to try to balance the fee that will be allowed with the complexity of the project, recognizing that some higher cost projects do still require a lot of effort. Lenny will talk more about this change later in the presentation. And the final underwriting change I'd like to highlight is a new requirement for owner equity contributions in sponsor loans proposed at application. Under the RFP, these contributions and loans proposed at the time of application cannot be replaced subsequent to award with other state funding sources if competitive points were awarded on the basis of that financing, or if the replacement of those funds would in any way delay a project. The agency has an expectation that if an applicant proposes financing of this kind, that the applicant has made a real commitment that can be counted upon subsequent to award. We've run into some issues in the past few rounds with this, and we really hope this clarifies the agency's position. So we now have a new NYCHA Seniors First 9% LIC set aside. As part of the state's long-term commitment to increasing affordable housing opportunities for seniors, HCR will set aside up to $15 million in 9% LIC for projects in central Brooklyn that are part of the Seniors First initiative. This multi-year set-aside of credit supports Governor Cuomo's Vital Brooklyn initiative by creating a competitive priority for these projects. Arnie will talk a little bit more about the specifics of the set-aside later in the presentation. New income targeting limit, targeting for senior units. In an effort to focus HCR's limited housing resources on serving the needs of the most vulnerable New Yorkers, applications requesting low-income housing trust fund and SLIC must serve seniors at or below 60% of AMI. There's a tremendous need for affordable housing for low-income seniors, these lower-income seniors, and these resources will allow applicants to provide deeper affordability. Targeting of the Middle Income Housing Program. Middle Income Housing Program, also known as MIP, makes resources available for projects that will advance two goals: mixed income revitalization and mixed income stabilization projects. Mixed income revitalization projects are located in economically challenged neighborhoods such as qualified census tracts, and they must be part of a comprehensive neighborhood-specific revitalization effort. Mixed income stabilization projects are located in transitional neighborhoods that straddle strategic borders between economically stable and economically challenged communities. There will be a priority for stabilization projects that are part of a comprehensive neighborhood-specific revitalization plan or stabilization effort. Applicants must demonstrate in these areas the disparity in economic and social conditions of the neighborhoods bordering the transitional neighborhood through the use of property sales data, poverty rates, vacant property data, crime data, public health indicators, and/or other data sources. Early award documentation. The early award section of the RFP provides a list of documents, in addition to our standard requirements, that demonstrate a high level of readiness, including a contract of sale, if available, and a draft LP-LLC operating agreement, again, if available. These aren't necessarily requirements for early award applicants, But if you're looking to convince the agency that your project is in fact shovel-ready and can meet the construction start deadlines laid out in the RFP, these documents will certainly help you do that. So please take a look at that. CD Online application enhancements. We've made some, I think, good changes to our online application, most significantly to the rent plan and development timetable exhibits. In particular, we think that the improvements to the rent plan will be well received. Kristen will go through these changes in more detail toward the end of the presentation. And the final what's new item is this webinar itself. The webinar that we're doing today breaks an over 2-decade-long practice of having face-to-face application workshops around the state. But in a bow to technological efficiency and a desire to ensure a consistent presentation for all applicants, we've decided to switch to a webinar format. As with all the changes I've covered in the past few minutes, we're interested in your feedback and how we can improve this format to better address your needs as applicants. So please don't be shy. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this presentation. So with that, let me turn the presentation over to Lenny Skrill. For anyone who's worked on affordable housing north of Bear Mountain in the past 25 years, Lenny needs no introduction. But for folks who've worked exclusively in the city, Long Island, or Westchester, Lenny is our Upstate Development Director who's now focusing on the western half of the state. He'll be taking you through a general overview of the funding round before handing off to Arnie Adler, who will go through the tax credit programs. Lenny?
Good afternoon, everyone. As much as I appreciate the efficiency of the webinar, on a personal level, I miss seeing all our happy sponsors. Looking forward to a new funding round.
I agree, Lenny. It is a little odd doing this. The face-to-face interaction is going to be missed.
So what is unified funding? It's basically an annual, regionally based, competitive funder opportunity for affordable multifamily housing opportunities. We have a single web-based application process to access funds for multiple state and federal housing programs. And 2018, we have 9 different funding forms for specific applicants. The unified regional competition is based on New York State's 10 economic development regions. We compare regions' applications within economic development areas. What do we have available? We have $37,500,000 of LIHTC. We have $4 million in New York State LIHTC. We have $44,200,000 of Housing Trust Fund. We have $45 million of SHOP. We have $10 million of Public Housing Preservation Program. We have $16 million of Middle Income Housing Program resources. We have $31,800,000 of Rural and Urban Community Investment Fund resources, and we have 50 Section 8 project-based vouchers. What's the timing? On August 1st, we promulgated our NOFA and NOCAs. On August 27th, we promulgated our request for proposals. Today is the webinar, which is September 20th. The first early award deadline is October 18th. The second early award deadline for a SHI is November 15th. The balance of the standard applications are due on December 19th, which I have to admit is my wife's birthday. And we anticipate making our early award decisions in December and our standard awards in April. What are the application materials that you have to be ready for? So, and they're all online. So you don't, there used to be a time when we used to do this, we'd hand out boxes and boxes of paper. Everything's online. So the core documents that you need to focus on are the RFP, the application CD online portal, the online application instructions, the HDFC design handbook, the capital progress manual, the 9% QAP, and the New York State Low-Income Housing Credit Article 2 Private Public Housing Law, which is the SLIC statute, the SLIC regulations, 2018 reference materials, This entire webinar is going to be online. The SHPO walkthrough guidance and contact list, the unified questions and answers. We're going to be updating it consistently, and our hope is to make new updates based on your inquiries every Friday. A pre-qualified market analyst list, our affirmative fair housing marketing plan, which housing opportunity census tracts are we considering, and materials on that project-based voucher. What's the process? What's going to happen? So from today until the submission deadlines that you embrace, we're going to offer pre-application technical assistance. Every application that is received is reviewed by multiple parties, usually a reviewer and a second reviewer for eligibility, rating based on the program that is the majority of the funding, the largest funding in the project. We do an underwriting analysis, a design analysis. We then do we have some set-asides and goals like, that we analyze projects for, like, supportive housing or housing opportunity policy, or this new house, this project oriented to Bio Brooklyn. We basically put every project through eligibility, score, design review, underwriting, to try to figure out which projects are the most meritorious and to make recommendations of awards. What we do is we basically try to figure out what project's most meritorious, and then we go through a process of trying to figure out how to pay for them by, what Sean sometimes describes as taking 10 pounds of flour and putting it into a 5-pound bag. So what is the application review process? We require pre-application TA for a wide variety of applicants and projects. So if you look on, I think it's page 66 of the RFP, there's explicit guidance in terms of what we want to receive in TA. So who do we require to have TA? All early award applicants. If you're going to do a project that's a collaboration between HCR and OPWDD, if you're doing a project that's using historic tax credit, we require not only have a TA session, but you have a SHPO participation process that's described in the RFP. All community investment fund applications, all sponsors that are proposing to do 9% LIHTC income averaging. So early awards. So basically, for the majority of early awards, the applications expected on October 18th, 2018. For those people who are proposing to do an early award for shy, it's November 15th, 2018. It's at 5 p.m. That doesn't mean 6 p.m. That doesn't mean the next day. It means at 5 p.m. on those dates. Our experience is CD Online works. The support staff that complements CD Online is fabulous. There is no excuse to not meet those deadlines if you're hoping to submit those materials. A little bit about the pre-application conference. We're going to basically want you to submit a proposal summary, a development budget, a rent plan, an operating budget, preliminary plans. If you're doing a preservation-type project, a physical needs assessment form, and an information occupied project information. If you're doing a preservation project and it's occupied, we are going to try to analyze the nature of the TA request you have. If your project is a resubmittal and you had a really positive design review, we may not necessarily have an architect assigned. If your presentation had a really great underwriting review, we may not have an underwriting assigned to the TA session. We'll decide that on a case-by-case basis. One of the things we're going to very rigorously analyze is, have you demonstrated readiness to proceed to construction with 120 days of award for those projects is in New York City, it's 180 days. We're going to look at your past performance. If you have consistently implemented your projects according to timetable, you're going to get more positive consideration as an early award for those people who consistently met deadline. Your project must clearly advance one of the state housing goals identified in the RFP. We're also going to ask them some supplemental information to assure us that you're ready. We want a title report. We want verification that the process of tax abatement has been initiated or completed in the community. We want this stuff, if we can, by the sponsor. Contract of sale. We want to see the draft limited partnership agreement, limited liability operating agreement, evidence that all local approvals and financing sources have been secured or will be secured within the early award timeframes, a phase 1 environmental assessment that determines the no recognized environmental conditions, or phase 2 ESA and a remediation plan if deemed necessary by the phase 2 environmental assessment. If NEPA review is required, submit confirmation that NEPA is expected to be completed within the early award timeframes. So what are the early award policy goals? And I'll try to give some examples if I can. Priority projects identified in the regional economic development plans. Those projects are specifically endorsed by the Regional Economic Development Council strategic plan, for which significant financial assistance has been made as part of that plan. I'm just going to pick a project out in Finger Lakes. Such a project was Sibley. That was, we also prioritize downtown revitalization initiative projects, the projects that clearly advance the objectives of an approved DRI strategic plan and located in DRI plan area. Priorities for DRI projects for which significant financial assistance has been made available as part of that plan. Upstate revitalization initiative projects. Projects specifically identified in an upstate revitalization initiative plan for which a portion of the project units will be affordable to low and moderate income households and for which significant financing assistance has been made available pursuant to that plan. Mixed income, mixed use revitalization. Must serve a mixed use neighborhood and be part of a neighborhood specific revitalization plan. Must target at least 15% of the households with incomes above 60% of area median income and have clear local support and commitment of local resources. Must involve the reuse of buildings or infill new construction or demo replacement buildings having a blighting impact on the community. The RFP established preferences within this early award policy goal for comprehensive workforce development plans, a new ESPRI initiative. Supportive housing goals. Empire State Supportive Housing Projects must have a conditional award notification through the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative Interagency and Operating Fund RFP, for which at least 50% of the project's total units will serve an eligible target population. New York 3 projects must have secured a commitment of New York service and operating subsidy for at least 50% of the project units. New York State Office of Mental Health capital projects must have a commitment from New York State OMH for capital, service, and operating subsidies for at least 50% of the project total units. Housing opportunity projects. These are family projects in areas with the following characteristics: close proximity to frequently occurring public transportation that provides reasonable access to child care and employment opportunities. They're located in census tracts identified in the 2018 reference materials, and at least 10% of the project units targeted to households at or below 30% of AMI. Must provide an average unit size of at least 2 bedrooms, and if you meet the housing opportunity policy project definition, you may be a candidate for a low-income housing credit basis boost. Transit-oriented development. Basically, workforce housing projects in close proximity to Metro Transportation Authority rail stations outside the city of New York, or workforce housing projects within a half-mile safe walking distance of an MTA subway station within the city of New York, or workforce housing projects in communities that have completed or implementing TOD plans that clearly link the proposed project to expanded transportation choices for tenants, or which are in close proximity to multimodal transportation centers that will contribute to the development of a vibrant, mixed-use, high-density neighborhoods through adaptive reuse of non-residential buildings or through infill development. Public housing redevelopment. So basically must propose the gut rehab or demolition and replacement of substandard public housing outside the city of New York. I'm going to hand off to my good friend Arnie Adler to take us through the 9% low-income housing credit program.
Thank you, Lenny, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Arnie Adler. I manage our tax credit programs here in Albany, and I do hope you all can hear me in the back of the room. Sorry, I do miss you all, and I wish you all well. I'd like to talk first about our 9% low-income housing credit program, what we call LIC, and this year we are making approximately $37.5 million available. This represents a significant increase in the amount of 9% credit available this round, and it results from a 12.5% increase in the amount of credit made available nationwide, at least temporarily for the next 4 years, through the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2018. We will be utilizing our existing 9% low-income housing credit qualified allocation plan, what we often refer to as the QAP or the QAP. There are no changes for this round. The QAP serves as our regulations for how we administer the LIC program in our state. Additional guidelines for the LIC program, like for all of our other capital programs, are included in the Unified Funding 2018 reference materials, Capital Programs Manual, and the Unified Funding 2018 Request for Proposals, what we call the RFP, which are all available on our website. As Sean mentioned, there is a new feature available under the 9% credit program nationwide this year, for which, again, we have not received much guidance, and most states have not yet issued guidance. So that is kind of a work in progress. Suffice it to say, the new statute provides for a new LIC minimum set-aside, in addition for our experienced developers to the set-aside that set-asides you're familiar with, such as 20% of the units affordable and targeted to households at 50% or less of area median income, or 40% of the household of the units targeted to households at 60% or less of the area median income. The Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2018, which Sean mentioned during the What's New section, created this new LIC minimum set-aside called income averaging in order to promote tenant income diversity and to help cross-subsidize units at lower incomes to increase affordability. While the Treasury Department, as I mentioned, has not yet provided guidance in regard to income averaging, statutorily speaking, here's the parameters. At least 40% of the project units are both rent restricted and occupied by individuals who do not exceed the imputed income limitations designated by the project owner. And in saying that, the average imputed income limitations designated by the project owner cannot exceed 60% of the area median income, right, for the entire project. The designated imputed income limitations must be in 10% increments, ranging from a minimum of 20% of area median income to a maximum of 80% of area median income, again, averaging out to no more than 60% of area median income. This new federal statute specifies the income limit increments available under income averaging: 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, and 80% of area median income. Units cannot be designated below 20% or over 80% of AMI and must be in those 10% increments. Applicants considering income averaging are required to participate in a mandatory pre-application technical assistance conference with HCR staff. Applicants must elect to utilize income averaging at the time of application. Applicants who elect to utilize income averaging must provide evidence in the application that the project investor or syndicator that it looks like you'll be working with at that point has consented to its use. We're recommending that you would include that as part of your investor syndicator letter of interest in attachment D3, your funding commitments in your unified funding application. Okay, this year, in terms of the LIC maximum amount per project which you may request, we will continue to make available up to $1.43 million per project for projects located outside of the 5 boroughs of New York City. For projects located within the City of New York, HCR has increased the LIC per project maximum and will make available up to $2 million per project with the following exception. HCR will make available up to $1.65 million for projects located outside New York City and up to $2.28 million, I guess that's $2,280,000 for projects located within the City of New York, which may be requested for projects in which 50% or more of the units have 3 or more bedrooms to serve large families. Again, this represents a potential increase in the amount of available funding for applicable New York City projects. This year, the LIC maximum per unit which you may request is $22,000 per unit, which does not represent the change for projects located outside the City of New York, and new this year, up to $27,000 per unit for projects located within the City of New York, which does, again, represent an increase for New York City projects which may require that financing. As Lenny would tell you, and as our colleagues like Lois Holden, Pauline Friday, Darren Scott, and all of our other colleagues who you might be meeting with during the technical assistance sessions, we do remind you that while these represent our maximums, applications generally which request less than these maximums do better in terms of competitive evaluation and scoring, something you should always keep in mind as you prepare your application. 9% low-income housing credit program projects must meet the design standards indicated in the qualified allocation plan, in addition to the requirements referenced in the RFP. A number of these, which Mike, I'm not sure, Mike, will you be discussing that specifically or not this year?
A little bit.
Okay, a little bit. But a number of these standards pertain to mandatory green building and energy efficiency requirements. The RFP also provides those green building and energy efficiency provisions which will enable your application to secure competitive scoring requirements. In other words, it's not some of these requirements are not mandatory, but will increase the competitive nature of your tax credit application. Also, the design handbook project square footage and common space maximums apply to LIC projects regardless of the other HCR funding sources you're proposing in your application. For projects proposing to utilize multiple sources of tax credit equity financing, as Sean mentioned, such as the federal 9% low-income housing program, our state tax credit, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, federal and state historic tax credits, brownfield tax credits administered by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, HCR requires that investors and syndicators assign an independent and separate value for the credit equity pay-in for each type of credit, reflecting the actual market value of the resource being proposed for purchase. Your investor should not provide a blended rate for all the tax credits to be utilized. So it'll be incumbent upon you as an applicant to make sure that you're working with your anticipated investor and make sure they set that forth in the letter of interest that, again, you'll be attaching under your funding commitments. I'll say a little more in regard to this issue when we get to the state tax credit. in regard to set-asides this year, we are retaining an existing set-aside of up to $5 million for projects involving Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative, ESHI, and our standard supporting housing projects. To qualify for the set-aside, ESHI projects must have received a conditional award notification through the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative Interagency Service and Operating Funding Opportunity, RFP, that's a mouthful, huh? Which, again, you would include in your application. 50% of the units must serve persons with special needs from one of the defined categories in our qualified allocation plan, and must meet the definition of supportive housing as cited in our qualified allocation plan under the section laid out here, as elaborated upon in the RFP. This includes the key elements of the definition include a documented need for housing for the targeted population, providing a comprehensive service plan and agreement in writing for appropriate services with an experienced service provider, a transportation plan or a project site in close proximity to public transportation, which would be accessible to the population proposed so that such tenants can access off-site services. Provision of an ongoing rental or other operating subsidy to ensure affordability for the targeted population for your supportive units. Submission of a firm funding commitment for capital financing from a governmental agency which serves the proposed target population, for example, OMH, OPWDD, and executed, or Homeless Housing Assistance Corporation, an executed written agreement with a public agency or experienced service provider which will provide referrals for the targeted units. And I stress this, the project design must provide an integrated setting to enable persons with disabilities to live independently. So that's the ESHI component of our ESHI and supportive housing project set-asides. Also part of the set-aside are our standard supportive housing projects. And to qualify there, the project must meet the definition of supportive housing, which I just ran through. And similarly to the ESHI set-aside, 50% of the units must serve persons with special needs. Housing opportunity projects, this one is also a holdover from last year, must be housing opportunity, or HOP projects as we call them, must be located in a HOP census tract, a designation based on low poverty rates and schools which have obtained a certain level of educational proficiency. Our UF 2018 reference materials provides a list of HOP eligible census tracts statewide. Housing opportunity projects, HOP projects, must have an average unit size of at least 2 bedrooms. HOP projects are not intended as senior citizen housing, and to facilitate the development of HOP projects, which are a continuing statewide priority for our agency, HCR is making the state's discretionary basis boost of up to 130% of basis available for eligible HOP projects, which may require the boost to secure sufficient credits to make the project work. Okay, these projects are very important to us. I should say when we talk about HOP projects, and Lenny, you can help me here, there are projects, when we refer to HOP, we're referring not only to a set-aside, but there's an early award goal which pertains to HOP projects, and there's also a tax credits competitive scoring provision related to HOP projects. They're all a bit different from each other. So again, read through the RFP, read through our qualified allocation plan, and talk to people like Lenny and Darren, Pauline, and Lois. As Sean mentioned in the What's New section, HCR is providing a new $15 million multi-year set-aside for New York City Housing Authority, what's called NYCHA, Seniors First Initiative, in recognition of the serious need for senior housing in New York City. To qualify under this set-aside, Seniors First projects must be targeted to seniors age 62 or more. The project must be 100% affordable, and the project must be located in central Brooklyn as defined by the following state assembly districts: the 42nd, 43rd, 53rd, 54th, 55th, 56th, 57th, 58th, 59th, and 60th. The neighborhoods included in these districts include Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, Bushwick, Canarsie, Crown Heights. I once spent a year in Canarsie, one weekend. Cypress Hills, Ocean Hill, East Flatbush, East New York, Prospect Heights, and Prospect Lefferts Garden. Seniors First projects must demonstrate in the application that the project received an award of site control as underutilized housing through NYCHA and through New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD. The project must also have received the endorsement of the independent emergency manager or other such monitor which HCR may designate. With everything we do, stay tuned. Always keep abreast of changes that we're posting to our website, including any reference to this set-aside. Things evolve, as you know, and we provide guidance all the time on our website. Highly recommend it. Okay, in terms of scoring guidance, as was mentioned previously by Sean, in regard to projects serving families, this year, there is a bit of a change in that we are making the maximum number of competitive scoring points available under our current qualified allocation plan for projects serving families that are located in those housing opportunity project census tracts, which I referred to a little earlier, or for projects that are located in a neighborhood or area which is part of a documented, comprehensive neighborhood specific revitalization effort or plan, okay? Also new this year, as Sean mentioned, he gets all the good stuff, we are pleased to advise you that HCR is seeking to promote smoke-free green housing by requiring that in order to qualify for competitive points under any of the 4 optional green building standards, applicants must commit at the time of application to smoke-free housing. Mike, you will be going over that in more detail, yes?
A little bit, yes.
Oh, okay. But we do have a new attachment B9. Is it new?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I was going to mention that too.
I don't need to say anything. Oh, you do. You do. This is important because, you know, frankly, I think this is an exciting new step for the agency. I think many of my colleagues here would agree. Lenny's nodding his head. So we're very pleased about that. As a reminder to our green building, our green building scoring points continue to be linked to and predicated on the receipt of scoring points first for cost effectiveness. That is, in order to be awarded points for green building, your application must also qualify for points under our cost effectiveness scoring category. Our evaluation parameters for how you qualify are set forth in our RFP. I should note we also have mandatory cost effectiveness requirements that represent threshold eligibility under the tax credit program. Suffice it to say, your application this round, as always, will be reviewed relative to other applications and the costs set forth in those applications, okay? We now move on to the New York State Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, what we call SLIC. This year, again, HCR is making $4 million available under the State Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, available for project applications submitted under this RFP. I should tell you most, if not all, our funded SLIC projects typically utilize 9% LIC financing, as well as other capital subsidies which we make available under this unified funding round. As Sean noted, there's an additional $4 million in state tax credits available through our HCR's current open window RFP administered by Housing Finance Agency from 641 Lexington Avenue for projects financed by tax-exempt bonds and 4% federal low-income housing credits and other financing. So if you are doing a project in which you envision seeking tax-exempt bond financing and the so-called 4% as-of-right credit, definitely contact our colleagues at Housing Finance Agency. The SLIC maximum request amount per project this year has not changed, $500,000 per project and $750,000 if 10% or more of the project units are affordable and targeted to households with incomes above the LIC restricted maximum of 60% of AMI. The SLIC program, as many of you know, is modeled after the federal 9% low-income housing credit program, except that SLIC finances the development of units affordable to households at or below 90% of area median income, as opposed to 60% of area median income. SLIC may not be used to finance units targeted to households, senior citizen households with incomes above 60% of AMI. As I mentioned previously in our discussion of the 9% program, 9% credit program, SLIC, like our 9% federal tax credit program, must meet the minimum, must meet the standard design requirements indicated in the SLIC regulations and the qualified allocation plan, as well as the requirements set forth in our request for proposals. Again, that includes design handbook square footage and common space maximum, which apply. Okay, as Sean mentioned in the What's New discussion earlier, the enacted New York State fiscal year 2018-19 budget authorized for the first time the bifurcation and certification or transfer of the state low-income housing credit program. Again, in order to broaden the potential state tax credit investor pool, and it does this by allowing for third-party investors that may not be the same investor that is financing the federal low-income housing credit transaction, and an investor that need not be part of the project's ownership structure, with the idea being that will, and it has worked in other states, that will thereby increase the value and dollar amount and the value and the amount of the SLIC credit equity pay-in for our funded project. Applicants and investors contemplating the use of this transfer of authority are encouraged to schedule a technical assistance session with HCR to discuss the project and the proposed investment and ownership structure of the project. Highly recommended, folks. As I mentioned earlier, for projects utilizing multiple sources of tax credit financing, investor letters must separately quantify the value of each tax credit resource, which may include SLIC, the federal 9% federal credit, LIC, state and federal historic tax credits, state brownfield cleanup program tax credit as applicable. We are requiring that investors and syndicators, and obviously you as applicants need to obtain this, assign an independent value, again, for each type of credit, reflecting the actual market value of that specific resource being proposed for purchase as a project financing source. As I mentioned, this should be included in your funding commitments. This clear delineation and specification of separate credit equity pay-in amounts by tax credit financing program is necessary for HCR to first evaluate and then to demonstrate the benefit and effectiveness of this change, allowing for bifurcation and transferability certification of the state low-income housing credit. By clearly reflecting the increased pay-ins and financing provided to our projects. I want to thank you all, and we look forward to working with all of you, and I'm going to hand the discussion back to Lenny Skrill. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to go through quickly many of the programs that we have available. I'm going to try to do it very quickly, focusing on areas where there's slightly changed from historic practices. So we there's a per project limit of $2.4 million that is modified to have up to $3.4 million for projects that meet the 9% light tech HOP requirements. That's different than the HOP early award requirements. The residential cap is $125,000. Our money is only available for permanent financing. It must benefit households below 90% of area median income, but in New York City it can be 80. And under the RFP, HTF cannot be used to finance senior units serving households above 60% of AMI. We have a preference for very low-income units in the trust fund. Up to 10% of HTF award can be used for community service facility space. For non-tax credit projects, development allowance could be 10% of TDC, excluding acquisition and project contingency. You can use 50% of HTF award for acquisition. It's subject to the used trust fund. It has to be used as HTFC design handbook, and it can't be combined with SHOP or public housing preservation funds. SHOP, supportive housing program. So there's per unit limits based on geography. So New York City, Westchester, Long Island, it's $150,000 per supportive unit and $110,000 for other units. The rest of the state, it's $85 for supportive, $60 for the balance. Again, similar to, it can't be combined with trust fund or public housing funds. PBVs can be used to access non-ASHI units and in ASHI projects. In New York City, PBVs can be accessed for both ASHI and non-ASHI units. The ASHI service and operating award will be reduced to account for services only on ASHI units. In order to be eligible for SHOP financing, a service and operating award or plan must be submitted that meets the requirement of the 9% LIHTC QAP definition for supportive housing. A minimum of 30% of project units for supportive housing. Projects that serve a intellectually disabled, developmentally disabled population must serve a letter of financial support from OPWDD for at least 1/2 of the TPC for those projects. ASHI supportive housing rents must be written at least 50% of AMI, maybe higher based on the operating needs of the project. At least 50% of the units in the project must be affordable to households earning no more than 60% of AMI. It's subject to LIHTC design standards, the QAP design requirements, and maximum square footage limits. Middle income housing program, MIP. There is no project limit, but you remember what the RFP has as a ceiling. There's a $200,000 per unit limit. So please note, in areas where market conditions that can support conventional financing or MIP is combined with other available financing sources, lower per unit MIP subsidies will be expected. Applications must carefully review to ensure that MIP units are not over-subsidized. Units must be targeted to households between 60% and 130% of area median income. It must meet LIHTC set-aside requirements, but not required to be combined with LIHTC. May be only requested for mixed income revitalization and mixed income stabilization projects. You want to go over the RFP closely on that area. MIP requests subject to standard subsidy layer requirements and cash flow requirements. May not be used to finance senior units, and is subject to LIHTC design standards, the QAP design standards, and maximum square footage limits. Rent advantage limits. For mixed income stabilization, revitalization, middle income housing projects, HCR will allow a 20% rent advantage for middle income tenants to encourage higher income households to reside in those neighborhoods. Please look at the RFP for definition of mixed income stabilization revitalization units. Use as an example, if you have a MIP unit with a set aside of 90% of AMI, affordability may not be targeted, can be targeted to 114, but if you try to say the unit should be 120 to 130, that is not something we're going to internalize, and we will restrict your targeting to 114. Public housing preservation. It's for rehab or demolition and replacement through new construction of site-specific multifamily housing owned by federal public housing authorities. Per project limit is $2.4 million or $50,000 per unit, with a household income up to 60% of AMI. It can't be combined with HDF or SHOP. You can't ask for PBVs if not in a RAD 1 program, and must meet our HCFC's design standards. Rural and Urban Community Investment Fund. So this program has gotten a little bit of changes, so I'm going to go a little slow. SIF may be used for non-residential purposes statewide and for residential rural preservation projects. The project ceiling is $2 million. The per unit residential max is $60,000 for households up to 60% of AMI for rural preservation projects. SIF is the only UF funding source available for residential rural preservation projects with mortgage financing from HCR and which are currently regulated by DHCR and/or HCFC that have unmet physical needs that cannot be addressed solely through the use of existing project reserves and for which mismanagement of the project is not a contributing factor. CIF non-residential purposes must be requested in combination with one of the UF residential development programs linked in the RFP. HCF design handbook for CIF residential, CIF non-residential per the requirements of the RFP. Housing Development Fund. Again, this is subject to the agency appropriation. HCF funds can be used as low-interest construction financing to eligible not-for-profits proposing HDF, SHOP, CIF, MIP as permanent financing. HDF can only be used on units subsidized by MIP for units targeted at or below 90% of AMI outside the City of New York and/or 80% of AMI for the City of New York. Applicants considering HDF to bridge HDO permanent loan should discuss with us prior to application submission. If you're using HDF, you have to internalize that projects have to go through multiple state agency approvals for both going to contract and dispersing funds. Thanks. Project-based voucher programs. We can make up to 50 units of PBV for projects financed through trust fund, LIHTC, SLIC, CAF, public housing, and SHOP. Modifying the PHP projects participating in RAD 1 may not request PBVs. PBVs can not only be requested for non-supportive units and SHOP projects except in New York. You need to understand the project-based rent subsidy regs, which is 24 CFR Part 983. You only can ask for PBVs in areas that HCR Section 8 program is supported by our local administrators. If there's no local administrator, you can't apply for project-based rent subsidies through this initiative. If you get project-based rent subsidies, you have to be expected to experience NEPA. We are going to basically do subsidy layering that does cap your developer and builder fees at the safe harbor limits. You can use project-based rent subsidies to seniors, family, workforce. All PBV must be targeted to households at or below 30% of AMI. You may be used for preservation of projects currently regulated by HCR if need is demonstrated. Existing tenants below 50% of AMI must be prioritized for households below 30. Upon turnover, all PBV of subsidized units must be targeted to 30% of AMI. Maximum PBV request is 25 units or 25% of total project units, whichever is greater. CFR for special population exceptions. Single stage or multi-stage lease-ups must be indicated at the time of application. Okay, now I'm going to underwriting issues where I'm going to pretend to be an underwriter for behalf of my audience. Apologize for the agency staff that actually do this work. So if I missed the mark, I apologize. So we are creating some developer fee limits for high cost projects. the low-income housing credit program on a macro level is under a certain degree of scrutiny for the high costs involving in a program. We're trying to create disincentives for project sponsors that have really high-cost projects. And so this is our practice. So for those high-cost projects that exceed 130% of the cost region median established by the funding round, we're going to put ceilings on developer fee that you're able to earn. If you're between 130 and 140, it's 13% your maximum developer fee. 140 to 150 is 12. 150, 160, 11. If you're over 160, it's 10. Recognize that this is meant to motivate you to sharpen your pencils and keep your costs low, because it's the best thing for the program and for our successful allocation of resources. New developer fee limit for multi-phase projects. Again, if you're doing a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of a project that we previously funded, is our analysis that the risk management issues you're dealing with as an owner are different and less substantial. So basically, if you are doing a phase 2 or 3 of a project, we may limit your developer fee to 10% of the developer fee over 15%. You know, we should talk about what the proposed fee limitation is during the TA session. You may have a very compelling case why that's an inappropriate position for us to take. Let's talk about it. HCR will allow a 3% annual increase in replacement reserve contributions rather than holding them level in order to account for cost fees over time. I just want to talk about this. The fact that we allow it doesn't mean it's feasible to do. You may find if you build into an inflation factor replacement reserve, your project trends negative, and that will result in a negative feasibility review. So please do the math. Each program has different reserve requirements. Make sure you understand the reserve requirements depending on the HCR term sheets. And again, I've said, thank you. Sorry, my apologies. Owner occupancy contribution sponsor loans. So if an owner offers an equity contribution sponsor loan in the application, we expect it to be implemented during the project. We will only consider these types of substitutions if you can make a case that you didn't get competitive advantage based on of those sponsor loans and equity contribution, and that the replacement of those loan and contributions will not delay the project. Contributions and loans may not be replaced by other state funding sources. This is partly in reaction to some of the dynamics that have been playing out in the last couple of funding rounds with sponsors that, you know, they sort of make positions, they're applying for this, but they haven't gotten it, so they propose this, and then they don't want to close because they didn't get funded. They're waiting to get funded by another state agency or another source. So builders fees. We're trying to move to a point that there's a macro availability of builder fees that are below 14%. We basically analyze the Exhibit 3 development budget and Attachment B2 construction cost estimate, and we sort of expect general conditions to be the max at 6% of construction contract, builder's overhead at 2% of construction contract, and builder's profit at 6%. General requirements will not be longer part of builder's fee and not included in the 14% on fee. The idea of this section is that we want builder's fees to be below 14%. We don't necessarily care if builder general conditions at 7 and builder's profits at 5. is meant to give flexibility for those builders working with us to figure out how to set their fee structure. It's not supposed to say, well, your project's not feasible because your general conditions are 7%. A&E will review carefully the general requirements, and so HCR financing is basically 30-year permanent financing, 1% interest only payable. The 1% monies must be above the line in the operating scenario. Our expectation is debt that HCF debt is payable against subordinate debt, including deferred fee loans. The only source of construction financing that's available through the funding round, with the exception of HDF, is CAF for residential rural preservation projects. Limits on maximum developer fee during construction. Again, this is really motivated to maximize equity offers from investors. So we don't necessarily want a lot of the developer fee. I misspoke. We just don't want a lot of developer fee paid during construction loan phase. We want more of it available for the project. So for for-profit developers, it's a 10% max, and for-profit developers is 15%. The expectation is that the balance of the developer fee is deferred and reflected in development as a source of construction financing source. What we're really trying to accomplish here is that we don't want to have higher construction financing interest levels to pay for owners, be it not-for-profit and for-profit, to obtain developer fee during construction. Other tax credit equity and mixed-use projects. Mixed-use project generating non-HCR tax credits, brownfield cleanup program, historic tax credits. Equity from non-HCR units must be proportionally allocated to the residential and commercial spaces according to the respective cost of each project. Applicants may use Buffalo BCP and HCF equity as financing source for the residence units. I want to go in a little detail here. We don't necessarily want you as a sponsor, an applicant, to say, well, all the historic credit is going to go into the commercial space, or all the brownfield credit is going into the market rate units. We expect that if you're allocating resources in your application, that you are making that these resources that are earned on a project home are rationally and proportionally distributed to all the units, including the affordable units. And if you're have another idea in this, that should be something you talk through in a TA session. Refer technical assistance. You should look carefully in the RFP in Section 5 of the CPM for specific underwriting criteria. We are updating the CPM right now to deal with underwriting changes. Check the website for updated versions. Where underwriting technical assistance prior to application is available on a limited basis where warranted. New apps, complex financing proposals. So let me just give an example. If you came to the agency last funding round and you had a generally positive underwriting analysis that was part of your application, and you're resubmitting and you're asking for technical assistance, it may not warrant having an underwriter assigned to reevaluate it. The staff of the agency are incredibly busy right now, primarily taking the awards we made in May and converting them into construction equity loan closings. We have an incredible amount of permanent loan in 8609s. Many of the sponsors that apply for our agency resources are also trying to get their deals closed and go to permanent financing in 8609. This is meant to assure that staff aren't sitting in meetings when they really should be working on getting your deals closed. If you have a situation where on a on a micro level, you have some questions, of course the underwriting unit and will be available to answer those questions. But our assumption is if you have a clean, your underwriting review from a previous submission is really clean, you may not warrant an underwriting, might have underwriting being assigned to TA session. Please follow the technical assistance procedures outlined in the RFP. I think they're on page 66 of the RFP. And I will punt to my good friend and colleague, Mike DeBonis.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael DeBonis. I am the Assistant Director of the agency's Architecture and Engineering Bureau. Hopefully this presentation will come across okay because it kind of feels like you're talking to yourself, which is something I never do because you just can't see the audience. But it is a new technology for us, and hopefully this comes across well. So I'd like to start with this slide just as a reminder that you need to utilize TDOL to always download your application attachments. They do change year to year, so right up on front it says use current forms. That's because we sometimes do get outdated information because people are using attachments that that we had updated years earlier, and now we're into second or third generations later, and we're not getting the proper information. And then at the bottom, it sounds kind of obvious, follow instructions, but we do sometimes get, I shouldn't say sometimes, many times get incomplete information or erroneous information because they're not answering the quote-unquote questions. This year, as shown on the slide, there are 2 design-related attachments listed that have been updated. The outline specification, we made some modifications to kind of better coincide with the type of information we need to see from you and to get rid of some archaic information. The cost estimate was changed with more major changes to coincide with our realignment of general conditions and general requirements, which I'll talk about that in a minute. Absent from the slide are 2 other attachments that were updated. B9 green building, there now is an attachment, and that's for smoke-free housing. B9 used to just be your form to update to us to talk about your green building submission. Now there's a attachment you need to download from B9 and then upload it back into your application for smoke-free housing part of that green building. And lastly, B10, visible and accessible move-in ready units. There's been some modifications to that. Okay, the next slide. General conditions, like it kind of alluded to earlier, I think Sean mentioned it, we've made some realignments to general conditions and general requirements. We're trying to, well, I think we are, aligning with industry practices, industry standards. And, you know, they're kind of confusing topics or terms because we were off track a little bit, and I've known people in the industry that have been a little off track on what is a general condition versus general requirement. So the way I like to think about it is a general condition are the obligations for administering the contract. It's what the contractor or builder needs to do to make sure the project can be built. Some general examples I have listed on the slide that helps to do that. And another thing I want to say too, if you look at the AIA general conditions for the contract for construction, it outlines responsibilities of not only the builder but the owner and the architect. And this is where these type of things are generated from. So the contractor or builder has to provide supervision. That's a site superintendent to oversee the work. It's a site office for the superintendent to work in and for the trades to come in and get information. Those type of things are general conditions. Common laborers that the builder has to hire to keep the site clean so that the actual workers that are building the project can do their jobs. Or maybe the common laborers go out and do some tasks and do some deliveries, those type of things. Rudimentary temporary facilities, things like basic security measures to just keep the site secure and available for the workers. Those of you in New York City, don't worry, we're not talking about the New York City safety plans. We understand that that's not just a rudimentary security situation that's mandated by a jurisdiction, and we understand that to be a general requirement. Cleanup, the contractor is responsible to clean up the site. General trash removal, we would consider a general condition. However, specific, detailed, required removal and recycling that a green building program would not be a general condition. That would be a general requirement. As was mentioned earlier, general conditions are now what's capped in the builder's fee, and you must outline general conditions and general requirements in attachment B2, the construction cost estimate. So you can't talk about general conditions without talking about general requirements. So general requirements, the way I view it, I like to think of it in my own mind, are that those are primarily the tools and services required to perform the work. You know, there could be common tools and equipment. Maybe that's generators at the beginning of the job before there's temporary electric to get the project rolling and to operate the tools. Maybe it's high-priced things like scaffolding and cranes. Could be specified testing services. There are code requirements for testing. There may be green or energy program requirements for testing, commissioning of mechanical equipment. The specifications may detail certain tests that have to be done to verify that the work is progressing properly and being built properly. Those are general requirements. Temporary heat for the building, temporary electric, insurance and bonds, general requirements. You know, the electricity for the job trailer would be general conditions. That's a small item, but the electricity for the job would be general requirements. Okay, on the next slide, Sean mentioned earlier that there's going to be some updates in the seeker regulations. The changes we see that are most pertinent to our types of projects are updates to Type 1 and Type 2 actions. These changes could modify the review time for your project. In some cases, the review time may increase. In other cases, it may decrease. So we just want to make you aware of those changes and the possible impacts on review time. The effective date is the first of the year, January 1st, 2019. We also want to give you the information that if you're currently going through a seeker determination by a local municipality or other lead agency, if that determination is made before the end of the year, then you can still rely on the current seeker regulations. And seeker stands for State Environmental Quality Review Act, if I didn't say it earlier. And when you do a coordinator review, the lead agency needs to reach out to us so we can concur with the determination. If we concur with it before the end of the year, then everything would be fine. If you have to go into the next year, then you have to use the new forms and the new seeker classifications would apply. And of course, any seeker determinations we make in this funding round will be done in 2019, so we'll be utilizing the new regulations. We will continue to concur with coordinated reviews conducted by the lead agencies, as I was referring to. That won't change under the new regs. And for more information and the forms, we put the address of the website here on this slide. Okay, the next slides are the items that are design related that are required for all projects applying under Unified Funding 2018. I didn't list all the little pieces in each category. They are written in the RFP. If you're a repeat applicant, you should be familiar with these. The first one, energy efficiency strategies. Again, the RFP lists a list of strategies you can choose from depending on your project necessities. There is a possible change to the EPA Energy Star program that we wanted to highlight. It's scheduled to have an update in 2019. We don't know what the changes are, but the rumors we've been hearing is that it's more of an alignment of the programs The programs I'm referring to are Energy Star Homes and the Energy Star High Rise program. And we're also being told that there's going to be more options for compliance. We're also kind of confident that there will be a phase-in period, so our hope is that it won't necessarily be a big effect on your projects, because if your project is moving along the normal schedule of when we award, when you start construction, we're hoping that that won't impact anything. But please work with your energy consultant to keep abreast of what's going on, just to be sure, because we actually don't have any information that's detailed about what's really going on. So it's up to your energy consultant to pay attention to this. Mandatory green building and energy efficiency practices are listed in the RFP. There are no changes from last year. Visitability has been one of our standards for quite some time. There's no changes to that. All projects, it's been mentioned a few times during this presentation. I think we're trying to stress this point that all projects are subject to the area limit sizes and common area sizes listed in the design handbook. And lastly, all projects have to be fair housing compliant. Last year we came out with a new certification that all projects after award, during the award, after award cycle, will have to submit to us the certification form. So many of you are probably familiar with that. The next slide talks about optional provisions for competitive points that are design related. Sean kind of went through a lot of this earlier, and also Arnie mentioned some things too, as far as the green building program participation. The new thing is that if you're going to receive points for green building participation, you have to abide by the smoke-free housing policy. As I said earlier, there's a new attachment B9 that must be included with your other green building information that you provide to us for that attachment. Green building is divided into two categories. I call the first one the sustainability programs. Those are the green building programs like LEED, Enterprise Green, and National Green Building Standard. And then there's the higher energy efficiency programs that we introduced a couple rounds ago, Passive House being one of them, and the NYSERDA MPP for existing buildings being the other. The other option for scoring points that are design related are the accessible move-in ready dwelling units. Again, I mentioned a little while ago that there's a new attachment B10, so please utilize that and follow the instructions on that form when you fill it out. That's one of the, that's up to the top, I think, of an attachment that people don't pay attention to when they're filling it out. So please pay attention and follow the instructions. Accessibility, there's two tiers of points. There's a 2-point tier for the first tier, and if you do more units, there's a 5-point tier. And again, that's all in the RFP, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with those differences. The attachment to show us your project design or the preliminary plans, that's attachment B3. There are 3 points I want to make about attachment B3. One is that the size limit for the attachment is 10 megabytes. There have been a couple instances in the past where people tried to upload larger files and their computers little circles spun and spun and spun, and in one case that I can think of, an application deadline was missed. So please understand the 10 megabyte limit, and also aside to that, you shouldn't be uploading at the last minute, but that does happen. We've heard that rumor. We also want to group your project drawings into as few files as possible, so it's easier for us to review the application and the attachment, and remind you to save the files in a resolution that's readable on a standard computer screen, because that's the type of computer we use. I like the next slide. That's talking about why we want you to group drawings into as few files as possible. This is what we used to see before we started stressing this point. When we receive drawings, they all have the same name. Our system automatically labels everything attachment B3, preliminary plans. The difference between each file is just a number that's, the first one is number 1, the last one is number 25. That means there were 25 separate files we had to open to understand this application. What you don't know is that we can only open one file at a time. So we can't easily navigate through the attachments to find something. And the other thing that happens is that the drawings are never in order. So if we open up the first one and we open up the second one, they may be two different parts of the design. So it becomes very difficult for us to navigate, and then it makes it difficult for us to understand your design. If we're jumping all over the place, we may miss something. So please avoid this. Group your files and your drawings into as few files as possible. My last point is on preservation projects. For the standard round, well, for all preservation projects, you need to request a visit by the A&E office to visit the project. You do not call us. You send the request for a site visit to the Unified Funding at nyshcr.org mailbox. For the standard round, the deadline for a site visit is 30 days prior to the application deadline. Earlier is better. If you wait to the last minute, we might not get there before the application deadline closes. So if you want us there as early as possible so we can give you usable feedback on what we're seeing in the field. Early awards, we need the request basically immediately because we're kind of at that 30-day or past that 30-day deadline. So we're right at that limit right now. You need to provide us a draft physical needs assessment form or preliminary plans with your application. I mean, for the site visit, excuse me. The proper physical needs assessment form for a credit standalone is attachment B6. All others utilize attachment B13 for the physical needs assessment form. That would be a Housing Trust Fund Corporation project with or without credit. The P&A is only required for the moderate, non-substantial, non-gut rehabilitation projects. The substantial gut rehabilitation projects, we just need the plans. Please refer to the Design Handbook, Appendix F, for the HTFC preservation standards when determining your physical needs assessment scope of work and understanding our minimum requirements. Thank you. It was good talking to myself, and I will return this back over to Letty.
So I can talk to myself even more. So we're getting to the latter stages of the program. We basically implement federal, New York State, and local fair housing laws are oriented to protect individuals from unlawful discrimination in housing. HCR staff takes this very seriously. This is not something we take lightly. We take advantage of all the laws available to provide equal opportunity and prohibit discriminatory practices against any of the housing choices of protected groups of individuals. Our role of HCR's Fair and Equitable Housing is to ensure the agency and our awardees comply with the Fair Housing Act and New York State Movement Rights Act. Every sponsor that gets an award is going to be expected prior to completion of the project to execute an affirmative fair marketing plan. Sponsors will work with agency staff and FEHO to assure that those plans are consistent with state and federal laws. Any questions, please contact Nadia Salcido at the email address on the bottom. We are trying to develop a abbreviated affirmative fair marketing plan. Our expectation is the short form is due 60 days prior to closing, the long form six months prior to marketing. The guidance is on our website. We work with you to design, micro, non-rubber stamp oriented affirmative fair marketing plans based on your project and market and what you're doing. We're specifically focusing on special needs and the housing preferences. We're analyzing individual assessments from people who have criminal convictions. We're concerned about things, federal requirements concerning violation against Women's Act, and we're trying to assure that those least likely to apply have the best opportunities to get apartments. Again, we analyze each preference and special needs population as part of the specific affirmative marketing plan. We need demographics on the preference groups, and we're going to need, evidence that the special needs population is supported by commitment letters, support services at all. Again, this is basically Violence Against Women Act of 2013. We require, appropriate protections for victims of domestic or dating violence. We require that all awardees comply with VAWA, and we require that there's no we prohibit housing providers from denying or terminating a tenant based on adverse factors like credit or rental history directly related to VAWA covered crime, notification of occupancy right to applicants and current tenants, emergency transfer plans for victims of VAWA covered crimes, and you should take advantage of our website to make sure that what you're doing is consistent with VAWA. We have explicit reentry guidelines in terms of New York State anti-discrimination policies. There's only 2 bars allowed: production of methamphetamine in the home and lifetime sex offender registry. Housing provider may consider convictions and pending arrest. Housing provider may only deny offenses that involve physical danger or violence to persons or properties or that adversely affected the health, safety, welfare of other people. The housing provider must conduct an individualized assessment of the applicant prior to initial determination of eligibility. The details of this, again, are on our website as noted. We require Section 3 of Federal and Community Development Act of '68 when there's federal funds. Examples of those funds are CDBG, Home, and Section 8 PVV. And it may apply to contractors and subcontractors that receive a contract excess of $100,000 for work on a Section 3 covered project. What are the goals? 30% of new employees hired should be Section 3 residents. At least 10% of total dollar amounts of Section 3 covered contracts of rehab, construction, other public construction should be granted eligible Section 3 businesses. At least 3% of the total dollar amount of non-construction contracted should be granted to eligible Section 3 businesses. Again, we require reporting on a 2-year time of year on targets. We're going to need you to document your efforts to recruit, train, employ, and extend contracting opportunities for Section 3 residents and businesses. We're going to analyze, we expect you to target local persons in the project work area. We're going to develop procedures to notify Section 3 business concerns about the opportunities. We expect you to create relationships with eligible businesses, concerns, labor organizations, union, vocational trade schools, community college. Please check the HUD Business Registry for potential business. Our Fair and Equitable Housing Office is there to help your project meet your HUD Section 3 goals. Please check our website for updates and contact any appropriate staff as necessary. We expect projects to meet or exceed our MBWB goals. We are really not interested in this stage of doing this type of work to hear that people can't meet the goals. I've never seen a project that hasn't been able to meet the goals if it was a priority for the owner. Again, this is something that is relatively new, but it's now a couple years old now. We try to give preference to service-disabled, veteran-owned businesses. Again, our requirement is 6% of our resources. Again, please direct any questions to Econ, Opportunity, New York State, HCR. Again, this is mostly post-award stuff that we're dealing with here. Thank you. For those projects that are we basically are required to analyze projects that are Davis-Bacon wage rate, prevailing wage eligible. Please check our website to analyze that stuff. If you're doing a project-based rent subsidy project with 8 or more units, if you're using home funds with 11, 12 or more units, you're a good candidate for Davis-Bacon wage rates. CDL updates. So basically, we've removed income targets from Exhibit 1, and we've created a new numbering of Exhibit 1. Exhibit 4, which is we streamlined information, income targets, and only in Exhibit 4A1. AMIs will be populated based on the county and bedroom size, so you don't have to do it yourself. Funding sources must be identified for each unit size and rent combo. I'll be honest with you, one of the things that reviewers struggle with is when we have to figure out what units are what and who they're for and who they're serving, what their rent level. Previously we were making educated guesses. We don't want to make educated guesses. Exhibit 6 this is really oriented to make the schedule more in sync with those development timetable letters that we work with sponsors on it. The dates will auto-populate for certain categories based on what you're doing. Technical assistance. Now, I said earlier on when I introduced our little presentation that we have lots of great people in this room, but none of us actually develop affordable housing. We only do so by helping you to do good works. We want as many eligible, competitive projects that meet our design standards and meet our underwriting standards to select from. Please ask for technical assistance. Now, why do we want you to do that? One is that we want you to present to us what you're proposing to do so that we can evaluate, do you have any eligibility issues we want to look at? Are you doing the best you can to compete for points, that you're demonstrating core underwriting feasibility and meeting our design standards? We want you to ask the TA for many of our programs. We require that you TA. It's a twofold thing. You're supposed to, part of the TA process is also about educating the HCR community about what you're doing. We have to review, let's say, 100 applications during the funding round. We will do our best to diligently look through your application and find stuff that makes the case for your submission. But sometimes we can't find what your representations. But if a TA session goes on and we hear like, oh, you know, applicant A said this, and they're not showing this. What's wrong here? We will remember, and it will motivate us to look more rigorously for the information that you want to have. The more we know about your proposal, the better able we are to evaluate it, and we want you to submit, help you achieve your agenda. Final thoughts. Ask questions, through Unified Funding and NewYorkStateHCR.org. If you have a question that's relevant to you and your project and what you're doing, it's probably relevant to somebody else. If you promulgate a question, we will respond on writing so other people can see the answer. Sometimes you should look before you ask the question to see if it's already been asked. Don't wait. How many people here file tax returns? How many prepare them, start working on them on April 15th? Well, I don't, because I'll know I'll screw it up somehow and miss the deadline. You should be, I can tell, we know who's naughty and not nice, and we can tell who's been working on their application for months and those people who start a week in advance. I don't want to hear from you that, you're struggling to meet the deadline because it's just been so hard when we have evidence on CD Online that you've only been working on it 2 days. Start working early. If you're a newbie in New York State, you need to make sure that you know how the CD Online system works, you know how to input your exhibit and upload and upload your attachments. Please, check consistently for updates. Again, if we find out we made an error in our presentation or an error in the RFP, or there's a problem with an attachment, someone's going to raise it, you want to see of it and let us know about it so we can correct the stuff. And I wish you good luck, and I hope this is sort of an experiment for us. We hope that this is going to result in, more time, less time making presentations, and more time giving explicit guidance for you so that you have more time to, and we like the fact that you can be at your desk and not having to drive to Albany, New York City, or Buffalo, or Rochester. So we want to wish you good luck and Godspeed. Thank you much.